You're listening to Car Free Midwest.
We're a podcast based in Omaha, Nebraska, exploring the stories, barriers, and joys of getting around without a car.
Our goal is to build a community around more transportation equity and less car dependency.
I'm Sarah Johnson.
And I'm Joshua LeBior.
And this is Car Free Midwest.
West. Mid. South.
We are talking with some folks from Bike Grid Now out of Chicago. So we've got Rony and Sammy with us today. I think that if you each just want to kind of do a brief intro of yourselves, and then you can like rock, paper, scissors, who wants to explain to us what your organization is. Rony, you want to start?
Thanks so much for having us. Rony Islam, organizer with Chicago Bike Grid Now. I joined the org at our first bike jam. So this was back in like early June. But yeah, I've been in Chicago for like 2.5 years and have been biking the entire time that I've been in Chicago. Super passionate about public transit, biking infrastructure, and making sure we make our cities as equitable and livable as possible.
Yeah, I'm Samantha Schneider. Everyone calls me Sammy, so we can be Sammy from here on out. I grew up in the Chicago area in a suburb called Skokie, Illinois, and I always dreamed of living downtown and taking the train to work every day, and now I live in the city and I bike to work every day. And so I've been here in the city since 2018 after I graduated from college, and have been cycling as my main form of commuting ever since, once I realized that it was the fastest way to get around most of the time. So that's how I started biking. And then I got involved in CBGN, which is Chicago Bike Grid Now, in like late June, early July. Saw them posting on Twitter and had to get myself to a jam, and then met Rony and everybody else and fell in love with it. So I can let Rony kind of speak more to what it is, if that's okay.
Perfect.
Yeah. So Chicago Bike Grid Now is an activist organization that's calling for a bike grid in Chicago. And the bike grid is essentially 10% of Chicago's streets. So that's about 450 miles out of the 4,500 miles of streets that we have that are bike prioritized and have 10 mile per hour speed limits for cars. And it's also on mostly residential streets. So not arterials, none of those like really wide streets. These are like the slow residential streets that are in everyone's communities and neighborhoods. And what being bike prioritized means is having signs that mark the bike priority, allowing cyclists to travel side by side, which is something you can actually get a $25 ticket from the police for doing. If you don't do like the single file biking and all the way to the right of the street, you could get a fine for that. So no more of that. Allow cyclists to ride in both directions on streets, and have street designs that reflect that 10 mile per hour speed limit that we want. So that's with planters, temporary barriers, chicanes, curves, pinch points, bump outs, speed humps, whatever it takes to get folks to slow down.
I love the idea of that so much. And actually, when I'm hearing lane miles of Chicago, it's actually not, population wise, but lane miles wise similar to Omaha. So this is kind of just like, we have a lot of folks in Omaha. That's where we're out of. But that's a lovely goal. And I really just like, after COVID happened, that was when a lot of us really got interested in street calming and like how a lot of communities around the globe were doing really innovative things. I'm just kind of wondering, was that any of the inspiration, or like why did y'all kick off in, it looks like from my little bit of research I've done, June 2022? What was the impetus then? That was a lot of questions in one, but I'm just really excited to talk to you about all of it. So
yeah,
shoot.
So I'm like trying to, yeah. So Chicago did something after the pandemic had started. They had a shared streets program where they had like temporary like barriers and things up to like try to slow down car traffic and give priority to pedestrians and cyclists. They ended up axing all those shared streets before the end of the program was supposed to be. And then I just saw a tweet today about survey results from that shared streets program, and 66% of people wanted to see more shared streets.
Do you know why they hacked it then? And I mean, obviously it seems like it was popular, but the powers that be decided it was not.
I think it was mostly like a very loud and vocal minority, and I'm sure Sammy feels this. I mean, we all feel this, right? It's like when we bike, it's just like a few people that have an issue with um, inconveniencing drivers, even though if you had really robust bike infrastructure, you can create really pleasant driving conditions by like reducing traffic and things like that. But anyway, I think it was just like a loud and vocal minority. And the guy who came up with this bike grid idea and the bike jam, Nate, who's also an organizer, I'm not actually really sure why he came up with the idea when he did. So that's a good question for us to take back to him.
I know in the beginning of the summer there were a lot of cyclist deaths we were seeing in the city, and I felt that I started seeing all this pop up when that was going on. There were specifically 2 toddlers who were killed in like 1 week, and there was a big protest in the beginning of the summer in early June, and I think the jams had already started going at that point that I attended, and that's kind of where I started connecting with these people. But yeah, I think there was just more. We're seeing more and more every year since the pandemic started. I've noticed an increase in feeling unsafe on the streets. So I think that has a lot to do with it too.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, our first bike jam was actually before the first like high profile cyclist death in Chicago of the summer, which is a really like terrible and grim thing to I feel like everyone remembers that one that kicked off this like huge wave of like direct action in the city. But we actually started before that. And I remember a reporter at one of our bike jams in front of city hall during one of the city council meetings asked like, oh, is this in response to the 2 toddlers who were killed? And our response was no. This is a response to systemic failings of a city, of Department of Transportation, of auto manufacturer. It's the whole system. And that's what we're responding to. And these deaths that could have been totally prevented are a tragic outcome of that same exact system. We are not reactionary. We're not reacting to these deaths that happen. We often do like specific rides because of deaths that do happen, but the bike grid transcends all of that. It's a proactive vision for something that we really want in the city, not something that's like really reactionary.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, that's unfortunately there would be plenty of opportunities for reactionary stuff. So yeah, sad to hear about toddlers, all of it, obviously, like you're saying, systemic failures galore. And these ones are definitely deadly, like so many, unfortunately. I was wondering, again, as my snooping around this afternoon, what is the Chicago Department of Community Collaboration? Because that sounds like something that might be interesting. I mean, I've never heard of such a thing in Omaha, but what is that, and what are your feelings about it?
Do you know what it is, Sammy?
Is that the meeting that we had? That one meeting?
No. So, you're thinking about the Mobility Collaborative?
Yeah.
No, so the DOCC was actually something that Nate had just like come up with off like the top of his head. So it's not an official like city department or anything. But I think his thought there was just like creating a space for like people to come up with ideas and just like different things that we can do to like take back our streets kind of thing. But yeah, I think that's kind of where he kind of like started up.
That's so funny because I feel like, I'm clicking some of the things on the bikegridnow.org, which, by the way, if you want to find out more about these folks, that is one way to do it. And yeah, I just was like, interesting. The Department of Community Collaboration. That sounds delightful. Anyway, okay, whoever this Nate person is, high five, Nate. I like your style. Okay, so World Car Free Day is coming up, and it sounds like there's some kind of fun event that y'all have going on. I have so many questions for you, but we are going to be, I think, putting this out into the world on Thursday. And so I just was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
So it's kind of complicated to explain. So I think there's a couple layers that we should explain. We do weekly bike jams, which was the major thing that pulled me in and the first thing that I ever attended. But basically, every week on Wednesday, either before work or after work, we pick a different neighborhood, different route, have everyone come together, plan, find partners, usually bike shops or community, other community organizations in that neighborhood. And we will do a bike jam. So that's typically around 4 miles, 3.5 miles. And we bike as slow as we possibly can along the route. And obviously, a lot of cars get very angry with us, and we cheer when they honk. And it's just a way to actually get out there on the streets and promote the grid through activism instead of advocacy on Twitter. And we've gotten a lot of people to come out to these. I think the one that we just had in Lakeview had over 100 people, which is pretty amazing. So that's one aspect of World Car Free Day. We're going to be circling around in the Loop, which is Chicago's downtown financial district, around a 2-block radius, and there's going to be a series of buses that are taking people there from various neighborhoods. So that's another thing we've started doing once a week. Are these bike buses, which are a great way to commute to the Loop for work, and we do them every Wednesday morning, and people join at various stops, and these are more of they are also a form of protest. Anytime, like Rony explained earlier, anytime we're biking in the middle of the street, not single file, we are subject to a $25 fine. But this is a more fun version, trying to get different groups of people involved. And so there's going to be buses. How many buses do we have, Rony?
6.
6 buses coming from all different directions, going to the Loop Jam. Once everyone's there, we'll do a little jam all together. So it should be a good time. Yeah.
How many people are involved? Because weekly bike jams and weekly bike buses, is that what I'm understanding? Wednesdays are the day. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wednesday is Bike Grid Now Day. So right now we do 1 jam a week. So that's Wednesday, and then we do 2 bike buses currently into the Loop in the morning. And not only do we do 2 bike buses, but they actually converge. So then, like at the last leg of the bike bus, we've got the 2 bike buses that have now converged. So like, way to make something complicated even more complicated, right? So when we started Bike Grid Now, the first bike jam early June was 9 people. After that jam ended, we had like 4 or 5 core organizers. Couple weeks ago, we had 15 organizers helping out with everything from bike jam planning, bike bus planning. We do a lot of like public comment at city council committee meetings, like that kind of thing as well. And now, as of today, we have 40 folks helping with all the organizing. So we've grown quite a lot.
Yeah, no kidding. That sounds sustainable. Growing. That's rad. This city council situation y'all have, how does that look? I used to always go to city council in Omaha, and just like, I don't even go anymore. I feel like it's physically destructive to my well-being. But I can't not watch. We still watch the live stream on Tuesdays. But have you seen like any actual response from the powers that be politically to your action?
Short answer is yes, in 2 different ways. One way is we've actually had a couple like sitting alder people join our bike jams. Alder people tend to fall into 2 categories when it comes to inviting them to bike jams. 1, they call the cops on us, or 2, they actually like show up and either ride with us or like talk with us beforehand. And we've actually built some really good relationships with some alders in Chicago, which came in handy for like one of these. Some alders wanted to increase the threshold for speed camera ticketing, and we were able to leverage some of our relationships to chat with alders. And then the second piece, and I'll let Sammy talk a bit more about this, is working with candidates for alder and candidates for mayor. And I'll let Sammy talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we recently planned a bike jam with someone who's running for alderman in our 30th ward. And so we got together with him, planned a route in his ward. He invited some community members. We invited our jammers. And we had a little listening session afterwards, which was very cool, where people could just ask questions like, what are you going to do about Belmont really needs some traffic calming measures, because that's how a lot of us got to the jam. We noticed a lot of things within the ward that could use some work, and it was very cool to speak to him directly about what he wants to do, and he was very open to feedback from us as well. We also, I think this kind of kickstarted with Cam Buckner, who is a mayoral candidate for Chicago. Our elections are in February this year, or next year. There's no February this year, but they're in February 2023. And he has been really outspoken on bike infrastructure in Chicago. So we invited him to a jam. He came. He did a listening session as well. So we're definitely being heard by some high up people. And I think what we want to do, and we're not going to pick candidates for people here, but I know Ronnie's kind of working on something that could maybe grade candidates. How supportive of a bike grid is this candidate, and that's something that's actively in the works right now.
Yeah, so it's a kind of twofold. We've got an organizer, Abby. I'm kind of like the data person in the org. That's what I do for capitalism. So it lends well to the community activism stuff as well. So pulling all the vote data on sitting alders, and then she's going to be analyzing that vote data and then coming up with a grade essentially as to is this alder safe streets friendly or not safe streets friendly. And then the second piece is we're building a bike grid now endorsement platform, and it's I think 5 or 6 bullet points of, if you're running for alder or mayor, you need to support raising Illinois state code, or lowering the minimum speed limit allowed in the state of Illinois. You need to support the minimum allowable speed limit in the city of Chicago. You need to fund and endorse a bill that allows CDOT to build a bike grid, and then hold CDOT accountable for it. There's a couple points in building that platform essentially, so candidates can endorse us. We're not going to endorse a candidate, but we want them to endorse us essentially. That way, we can make the bike grid basically something that candidates need to include in their platform, and then they can start fighting with each other on getting a better bike grid. It's why only 450 miles? We can make it more, and then doing that kind of thing.
I love it. That sounds very smart. Nice ideas galore. I'm wondering, is there another organization in Chicago that's doing similar work? I feel like it's such a big city. I wouldn't be surprised if there are other bike walk friendly, obviously Streets blog and stuff like that. How do you feel like you fit in and or collaborate with other orgs doing similar stuff?
We've worked with a couple orgs like Better Street Chicago, Active Transportation Alliance. The nice thing about the Bike Grid Now effort is it's super focused. We don't want to exist in 2 years. We want the Bike Grid Now to have been built by May 2024 is kind of our target kind of thing. And then we just want to ride our bikes for fun on the bike grid. These other orgs, their breadth is a little bit wider. They've got a lot more under their belt. I know Better Street Chicago is fighting against the DuSable Lakeshore Drive reconstruction project, where they want to just reconstruct a highway that's along one of the world's most beautiful lakefronts, but that kind of stuff. But we work closely with them, and then we're starting to do a bit of coalition building as well within Chicago. But we've kind of got our niche. We've got our little spot, and we feel quite happy with where we're at.
Yeah, totally. And hyper focused actually makes it probably doable, because I feel like, so Mode Shift Omaha is a transportation mobility equity nonprofit that I helped start in Omaha about 11, 12 years ago. They're one of the sponsors of our show. And it's, sometimes it's like there are so many things that org is trying to do. It's like there's a bike team and a walk team and a transit team and a missing middle housing team. And it's just like, I burn out and I'm not doing that anymore, just talking about it. But I really appreciate the singular focus. That's probably going to make you all very successful. So I guess, we talked a little bit about a lot of bike grid stuff. I'm just kind of wondering, we like to talk more about just you as human beings, maybe without cars. What does that look like? I know Rony, before we hit record, you were talking about how you kind of are taking a little time away from Chicago. Can you talk a little bit about that and what your experience maybe is like comparatively on a bike?
Yeah. So I used to work for United Airlines, and I had travel benefits, and I would like fly quite often. I remember it's just like the more I traveled, I realized there's like so many different kinds of cities out there in the world, and people get around in such different ways than what I was used to. Like I grew up in a like mid-sized or smaller city in the Northeast corridor, but my parents had cars. I got around mostly by car growing up. Biking was kind of like this like juvenile thing that people did, like you do as a kid, and then you stop doing it once you get your like permit or whatever. But then like going to Istanbul, going to Amsterdam, going to Lima, Peru, just seeing like how people get around in all these other places in the world made me realize that I wanted to see more of the world. And then recently, earlier this summer, when we saw a big spike in cyclists being killed, I was starting to get really like fed up with being in Chicago, like really fed up. And I wanted to travel and stuff. And then my lease was up, and I decided to move down to Mexico City for a couple months. And then the plan is to go to Santiago and then Buenos Aires for a couple months each, and then come back to Chicago for Chicago Summer 2023.
I'm curious to hear a little bit about, what the infrastructure is like now for and your feelings about cycling in Chicago versus cycling in, Mexico City right now.
So I went to Mexico City for like 3 weeks back in March. And I remember one of the first things, there's like so many thoughts I have on getting around Mexico City. They've got protected bike lanes on a lot of their arterial streets where there's no on-street parking. They remove on-street parking and then give that space to bus-only lanes and bike-only lanes, which is like pretty awesome. And there's also like a different like cultural view, I guess, on bike lanes. In the United States, you build a bike lane, there's going to be a car in the bike lane. Like no matter what you do, there's going to be a car in the bike lane. Even in Chicago, I saw a picture like today. The CDOT erected a Jersey barrier along a bike lane, and there was a CDOT truck blocking access to this protected bike lane. Right? Yeah.
Literally before our protected bike lane, like right when it opened, Sarah and I went to ride it for an episode, and we like recorded us talking about it and writing on it. And that day, our power district, OPPD, a truck was parked in the bike lane right next to a parking spot.
Yeah. But like in Mexico City, folks just like stay out of the bike lane. Like the protected bike lanes are like pretty easy like to use because you don't have to worry about cars blocking it. Like Ubers and stuff will still like pick up passengers and drop off passengers, but they do it in the car traffic lane. They'll like block car traffic, but they will not park in the bike lane. And there's like signs on like parking lots and parking garages that say, please don't block the bike lane. And that like, it's just like a different like perspective, I think. Mexico City traffic is horrible. Like every single mode of transportation in Mexico City is like capacity is like filled to the brim. Like they have BRT that runs like every minute in rush hour. It's like a bus pulls in, a bus pulls out, bus pulls in, bus pulls out kind of thing. And like all the buses are full. All the subways are full. The highways are like jammed up. Folks are biking. It's just like so many people, but I love that chaos. So I've been really happy.
Yeah, I flew into Mexico City a couple of years ago, and it took an hour, maybe a little over an hour to get to my friend's house from the airport in the Uber. And then because I got there like at night, maybe, you know, in the evening, at nighttime, whatever. And then when I flew out of Mexico City, I went back from my friend's house, and it took me 15 minutes to get to the airport in the Uber that time because it was like
Yeah.
6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, same situation. I'm staying with a couple friends in Mexico City, and if there's no traffic, it's like a 20-minute Uber ride. If there is traffic, it's like an hour and 45 minutes. But yeah, so the traffic is really, really gnarly there.
I didn't
I
realize
will
that about
have,
the street parking though. Like, and now when I'm thinking in hindsight, in the neighborhood we were staying in, like, I'm thinking back on it, I'm like, yeah, there really weren't a lot of cars parked on the street. Like, and a lot of, yeah, I thought that I didn't even like notice that at the time, but in retrospect, I'm like seeing it in my head again.
I will say Mexico City right now is facing a really big wave of lots of like Europeans and folks from the United States who can work remotely, and a lot of folks are moving down there, raising rents for locals, and raising like prices for groceries and all sorts of things. So that's been something they're also fighting. So I do want to be compassionate to the negative effect of globalization and folks moving down there in search of cheaper living situations. I will say I moved down there because I saw that they've got subways with 2-minute headways. So a little different, but still a really big issue down there.
I always just like hearing different perspectives on. And it sounds like, yeah, you've already been a world traveler because of work. Maybe that's fun to explore via whatever mode of transportation you're after. So, Sammy, you said you've been in Chicago for how long? What's your history with biking or just not driving? Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, growing up, I grew up in Skokie, Illinois, very close to the city. But I biked recreationally with my whole family, with my friends. We'd go bike out to Northwestern's campus and watch the sunrise. And that was really how we could get around before we all had driver's licenses, you know? So once I got my driver's license, I was driving to school. I was driving everywhere. I moved down to Miami, Florida for college in 2013. And that's when I realized how much I hated living in a space that you basically need a car to do anything. I didn't have a car my entire 4.5 years down there. I did bring a car for my last semester, so I could pack up all my stuff and bring it back to Chicago. But it was very hard to live in Miami, Florida without a car for that long. We didn't even have Uber for the first year and a half. So we were taking taxis, and they didn't want to come to campus. So we'd have to like walk a mile and like get a taxi away from campus, because there was no transit to get anywhere that we wanted to go. It's actually a pretty big problem. Our Publix, which is the major grocery store for Florida, was across the highway, US 1, like major highway from campus, and our campus sat on the highway. And there were a lot of deaths of pedestrians trying to cross the highway. Eventually, they created a pedestrian bridge. My last year, I was down there. But in general, like, it was a really rough experience. I would go to the beach, and it would take me an hour and a half on 3 different buses. So I could not wait to move back to Chicago. I did not want to ever live in a car-centered space ever again in my life. Moved back here. I studied architecture and got a minor in urban studies, which is like urban planning adjacent. So I've always had a passion for that. And so I moved back. I took my dad's old bike and started biking to work for my first bike to work week. And that's how I got into it. I am competitive. So I won an award for Bike to Work Week, my first time bike commuting in the city, went down some streets I probably would never bike down in my life now, because I had no idea what I was doing. And that's how I got involved in biking here. I I got fed up waiting for the CTA. There's been a lot of problems with our public transportation, especially since the pandemic, not arriving, even though it says it's going to come on the tracker. You get a little impatient and you realize, I can leave whenever I want. I know exactly when I'm going to show up. I'm not going to get stuck in traffic. I can roll around that. And you can get anywhere you want to go within a reasonable amount of time. And so for me, it really changed everything. And then I also, I had knee surgery a couple of years ago, and I was big into running and long walks, and biking has been so much better for my joints than running or anything, and it's been keeping me physically happy. So yeah, I'll never give it up, hopefully.
That's excellent. Cool. And you said that you just happened to stumble upon a bike jam. That's how you got involved with the
I saw it on Twitter.
You saw it on Twitter. Okay, right. Good. That's where I found you too. So this is perfect. Awesome. I'll say one thing quick that I found on that hilarious Department of Community Collaboration. It said something about helping City Hall find its courage. And I just really liked that, because I feel like so many times the conversations where, cities are not all unique. We all have a lot of the similar problems. And it's so many times we just need City Hall to find its courage. So I just wanted to say that out loud because I thought that was a good way to put it.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem facing Omaha is that our city council has no courage at all. And our city hall, it's kind of pathetic over here.
It's really tough, right? Because a lot of the loudest constituents often are the ones who don't want their parking to go away. They don't want to lose space for, I don't know, they're driving or make it driving any more inconvenient for them. We've been trying lots of different tactics in trying to get alders to find their courage. One thing we did recently, I was giving public comment at the Committee for Pedestrian and Traffic Safety, and I listed the number of vulnerable road users, so pedestrians and cyclists, who have been killed or severely injured in the ward of every single member of that committee that was on the call, or not even on the call either, and just listed them all off. I can't remember the exact numbers. I mean, it was 15 people or whatever, but said how many people died, how many people were killed, and then how many people were severely injured. And there were only 2 alders that did not have someone killed in their ward this year so far. Everyone else had at least 1 death, and everyone had people severely injured. And I think by kind of highlighting, the big numbers are always really hard to if I told you 100 people were killed in Chicago due to traffic violence, it's okay, yeah, but how does that impact me? And by calling out individual alders and saying 3 of your constituents died this year, this is what your inaction is causing. It helps them kind of find that courage.
Yeah, I think really humanizing the situation. I mean, I know that I was a cyclist for a really long time, and I didn't really do any activism outside of I went to a couple what are they called? Critical mass. I went to a couple critical masses and stuff like that. And I believed in cycling infrastructure. But I didn't really think about it that much, even though I rode every day. I rode in the snow. I had a very similar situation to Sammy where, I got kind of tired of waiting for buses and stuff like that. And I would have to take taxis because this was before Uber even existed, when I was in my early 20s. And so, I would call taxis every now and then if it was really snowy, but for the most part, I was always on my bike. And for some reason, I never really even thought about the infrastructure. I didn't think about bike lanes. I didn't think about any of this stuff until, maybe 5 years into me primarily being a cyclist, and one of my friends got hit by a car and passed away. And I think that and then, a lot of the people at the time on the internet and maybe on the news and maybe certain politicians blamed it on her and said, oh, she should have been wearing a helmet, et cetera, et cetera. Although she was wearing a helmet, but even if she wasn't, fuck off with that. Yeah. So I think that really humanizing this and telling those stories is so incredibly important. And I think that that's such an important part of the work y'all are doing.
I also think that a lot more people than we realize are supportive of it. At the last jam that we did with the alderman, we had nothing but support. No cars honked at us at all. Everyone was cheering. People on the street, walking down the street, their kids were like waving, and we were waving at them. And that's generally what we see. You know, we get a couple aggressive cars here and there at many events, but like, I really think that most people want to see bikes and cars separate from each other, honestly. Like, people who drive hate sharing the road with us, and so that's something we are going to start working on as well, like creating messaging for car users, because we're not gonna win over anybody by saying, you know, sell your car, let's go. You know, the system is not really there, and it's understandable why people don't feel safe biking here. I don't always feel safe. You know, something happens, I'm like, I'm too anxious today to get on my bike. And so it's totally understandable. And we need to involve everyone we can in this fight. So I think we have more support than we know.
Yeah. And I think that talking to car users is so important. Sorry, Ronnie, I didn't mean to interrupt, but because I do want to hit it home. We had this like state senator in Colorado for years who, I don't remember if she said it publicly, but I know that people that, like, she said it at an event my brother was at. They were talking and he was talking about bike infrastructure, and she was like, well, I don't really support like bike lanes and stuff because I don't like whenever bikes are on the street because I'm scared I'm going to hit them and stuff like that. So I think that is incredibly important. What you're talking about is like changing that narrative.
Yeah, I mean, we see time and time again, like, often people who are like angry at what we're doing, but they're like so close to like being on the same side. Just like what you mentioned, Josh, like, I don't want to share the street with cyclists. I don't want bike lanes. It's like, no, I mean, yes, you don't want bike lanes, but what you do want is protected bike lanes. So then you don't have to like worry about cyclists like avoiding a car parking in the bike lane, swerving out into traffic and all that kind of thing. What you want is actually a bike grid. And it's like the folks are like so close to being like on the same page. And that's what makes the bike grid like such a no-brainer. It's like such an easy, simple concept to understand. And anyone can get behind it. If you're like someone who uses our streets, whether you're a pedestrian, cyclist, transit rider, driver, whatever, you should have a reason to support the bike grid.
I love it. I sure support it. That sounds real good. The ways that folks can get in touch with you. I know we talked about bikegridnow.org. I think you're on pretty much all social media. At least I know Twitter and Instagram. And then, yeah, I guess if you're lucky enough to live in Chicago, go find them on a Wednesday.
I do have a last question. Last question. What bike are you guys riding?
So it's kind of funny, but I'll go first. I'm riding a Trek Checkpoint SL6.
Yeah, and I'm riding a Trek Checkpoint SL5.
Amazing.
But
wow.
I
worked at a Trek dealer for a while. Those are nice bikes.
Yeah, it's a great bike. I have two bikes. The one that I stole from my dad when I first moved back is also a Trek. It's vintage. It's like 30 years old, and I took it into the bike shop, and they were like, "Oh my God, you bought this here 30 years ago." I'm like, "No, I'm not even 30. I wasn't born yet." And that one I feel more comfortable locking outside in the city, so I'll take that to do errands and things. And then the other one, it's more of my recreational ride.
Thank you so much for having us. But yeah, at Bike Grid Now on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, bikegridnow.org, and email is grassroots@bikegridnow.org.
Awesome. This has been super fun. I really appreciate you both taking the time to talk with us. And should be out on Thursday, which is World Car Free Day. So enjoy it, celebrate however you will, and keep in touch.
Thanks, y'all.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
And that does it for this episode of Car Free Midwest.
We're here almost every other week with interviews, topics, and documentary pieces covering all things transportation.
You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Car Free Midwest, or visit us at carfreemidwest.com.
So subscribe now to Car Free Midwest wherever you listen to podcasts, and support us on Patreon at patreon.com/carfreemidwest.
This podcast has been produced by me, Joshua LeBure,
with support from Mode Shift Omaha, modeshiftomaha.org.
And this is our sign-off.
Good day.